doing all right at home. We're going to talk a little bit more about America and what's going on in the 1920s. And we said, look, uh, the post war economy, things were going to go really well in the United States. Warren Harding promised a return to normalcy. Okay. And he said America needs to get back to business before, like what was happening before World War One. All right. So return to normalcy, and like I said, in 100 years later, from 1920 to 2020, it's amazing how much a return to normalcy would be really great. And part of the business world that changes dramatically comes from the laissez-faire policies of the government, saying we won't get involved in various regulations of businesses. We're going to let businesses do what they do best, and that's come up with better ways of living. And we talked about the assembly line process and how significant this was to Henry Ford. And we're going to recap some of that. Remember, you went from an individual putting together an automobile, having expertise, knowledge, and at the same time, you now have an assembly line process where, with the assembly line, every person learns to do one specific type of job, and they do that all day. And Henry Ford learns that if you pay people well enough, it'll overcome the boredom of one particular task and doing that nonstop. So Henry Ford innovates by not only creating the assembly line, but Henry Ford also innovates by paying his factory workers more, right? And this is a big deal because other factories and other businesses have to copy his tactics of what he's doing, because not only is he paying his employees more, but he's producing his automobiles at a faster rate, and he's able to actually make the automobiles in such a way that they're, because they're turning them out faster and they're still getting the mass amount of productivity from their workers, they can make their automobiles cheaper than what other companies do. And so they have to do it in order to keep up. Businesses do this because it gives them a competitive edge against other businesses. Right? Henry Ford also allows minorities, racial minorities, particularly Black Americans, to get involved in this particular field of work. And not only does he allow them to work in his factory, but he also offers opportunities for advancement. And for Black citizens at the time, this really wasn't something that was common at all. Okay. On top of that, what else we have that's interesting with the assembly line process is that you get more people who now are eligible for good paying jobs. Remember, to teach somebody to do one task in a factory, you don't need to you don't really need to be that smart. I don't say that in a bad way, but it allows people who don't have the highest level of education or who aren't the smartest people in the world to have a really good paying job, as long as you can teach them to do one thing. And ultimately, it expands the middle class in America, because when other factories start doing this, it's like there are job opportunities for people where they can make a decent living. And one of the things that a lot of Americans tend to believe is that even if you're not the most well educated or the smartest, if you're willing to put forth some work, some effort to work, a good work ethic, then you can create or have a decent standard of living. And that's one of the goals that we still have in society today. Okay, now the technology changes. Also, we mentioned the radio. Okay, the radio is good for disseminating news. It's an entertainment source. It allows the family to kind of gather together. People like to listen to the music. They like listening to radio shows where you would have like a drama played out. All right. That's pretty fascinating in and of itself. And imagine a world where you never had a radio before, you didn't have access to television. This is something that borders on magical for you. Okay. And the ability to disseminate information over large areas of land and to do so quickly completely changes everything. It's almost the same way that the internet has kind of helped globalize the world. That's what radio did for the 1920s. Okay? Now, other technologies at the time, a lot of luxury items that make people's lives easier. We were talking about things like a refrigerator changes the way that people eat, changes the way that people store food. You didn't have to go to the store every day. And so what people would typically do back then, certain things like you would go to a butcher's shop to get, beef, chicken, pork, whatever meat you wanted. And you had to be careful about that because you didn't want it to go bad. And so you had to plan out what to get. regularly. You didn't get it and store it in a refrigerator or freezer. But once those items become affordable, and now people have more money because, like we said, we have more people who have good paying jobs, right? So, refrigerators, freezers, you also get things like indoor plumbing, electricity that become available, washing machines, things that allow us to have a better quality of life. And ultimately, that's what people are always looking to invent to some degree. How can I make life easier and make money doing it? All right. And so that's what we're up to in the 1920s. So there's a major change in technology. People have more leisure time now so that they can do some of these things. Like I said, we were describing in class the other day, I think it was fifth mod, an old school washer. What you would do is you'd have a giant metal tub filled with water and you had a genuine washboard. Uh, Look that up on Google image search, an old washboard where you had to manually scrub the clothes on the washboard and get out stains and dirt and everything else. And now you have a washing machine that does it for you. Okay. Now, make no mistake that America in the 1920s, it's really good for the economy. Check out this data right here. This shows you what we call GNP, gross national product, the value of all the goods and services that American companies were producing. Okay. And it shows you in per capita in dollars. And you notice too that over time in the 1920s, the value of goods and services it's dramatically going upward. It's a significant increase until you get to 1929. And look, when we get there, we'll talk about the start of the Depression, the stock market crash. It's really a bad time in 1929. But throughout the 20s, business is good. Okay, business is good. Take a look at this too. This shows you labor force growth and unemployment. Okay, take a look first at the unemployment rate on the red line, and you can see that in 1920, your unemployment figures it stands at about 5%. Okay. And normally, unemployment in any given country, if it's functioning well, 5 to 6% is not unusual. Okay. People like it because here recently in America, unemployment has been below 4% until Corona hit. And right now, it's significantly higher because of the coronavirus. But look in the 1920s at the red line. The trend is that it's going down. You can see the 1921 is a tough year. Unemployment spiked at 9%, but then it's trending downward all the way until 1929. All right. Unemployment's going down. Labor force growth. You notice that every year, the percent, or excuse me, the number of people who are in the workforce is increasing, and you can see that normally it's like 1%, but you're adding to your growth or to your labor force every year. You're increasing the number of employees you have. All right. The number of more people you have working, the more productive your country is. It's really a good time for America. Okay. Now, let's talk about the successes here. Okay. And please ignore the fact that I misspelled factories on your outline. I will correct that. All right. The farm production and factory production in the United States is significantly going upwards. That's one of the reasons why we see, an increase in labor force and a decrease in unemployment. And if you're asking yourself, why are farms having so much success? And the answer is this. Remember, what did we say about Europe after World War I? Their farms are devastated. Okay? Trench warfare, artillery shells, bombs, they have ruined the landscape in France and Germany and other surrounding areas. Okay? And so ultimately, Americans were needed to help supply them food. And so American farms are loving it because they're able to ship food overseas to help feed Europe. Factory production is up as well because, like we said, now you have Henry Ford who's changed the way that factories are working. Their output is greater. Their employees, they have more employees, and they have individuals who now have money, who have the ability to buy these products. And so when people have extra money, they can afford a refrigerator, they can afford a washing machine, a radio, the things that human beings want in their homes. Okay? Now, what's also important, and the second part of this major success for America at the time, was the fact that America at the end of World War I and the start of the 20s, we are a creditor nation. Okay? People owe us money, particularly Great Britain and France. We had loaned out a lot of money to various nations, but the fact that those two countries owe us a significant amount of money is going to be a big deal. Okay? We're a creditor nation, not a debtor nation at the time. All right. Now, you have to realize after World War One, America isn't just about making money and economic success. One of the things that we want to do also is focus on international diplomacy. Okay. And you have to remember that World War One's really ugly. Okay. People at the time were very much wanting to prevent another large scale European conflict. Okay. And remember, there's still some tension over there. Germany's upset because they got a raw deal of the Treaty of Versailles. Great Britain and France are always a little sketchy about Germany. So there's still some tension. All right. And you still have countries in the world who are still armed significantly. Okay. And so America in the 1920s is all about trying to prevent another large scale conflict. All right. And so they're going to take steps to try to prevent that. All right. And here's one of the things they wanted to do. In 1921, Washington, D.C. hosts what's called the Washington Naval Conference. All right. And the Washington Naval Conference was all about trying to get nations of the world to reduce their armaments. Okay. And let me show you this little graphic right here. You see that the battleships, the number of battleships that countries started building starting in 1905, which is when the dreadnought got really popular, all countries felt like they had to do the same thing. And all the way up through World War One, every country, the amount of battleships by the tonnage is increasing. The trend is going upward, all right? Because you had that arms race, that militarism, where one country says we have to keep up with the other countries, okay? And the Washington Naval Conference is all about trying to get countries to reduce the size of their militaries, all right? Now, there are 5 big countries at the end of World War I who are still really capable of having a strong navy at the time. So there's really 5 key countries at the Washington Naval Conference, all right? And ultimately, you see them listed over there on the right, except for one, okay? We're going to throw out Germany because, remember, their navy got reduced, so they weren't there. But the other countries on the right, Great Britain, France, Italy, Japan, and the United States. These were the only 5 countries at the time who had enough financial resources to have strong navies. So the idea was, let's get all these nations together in Washington, D.C., and what we'll do is we will try to get these nations to voluntarily reduce the size of their navy, okay? And America thought this would be a good idea because, hey, militarism, the building up of the navies, that was one of the things that led to World War I. Everybody's trying to compete with other nations. They're trying to keep up with their neighbors, and it causes a lot of problems, all right? So remember, Germany's not part of this because their navy is reduced. And if you're asking yourself, is the Soviet Union involved? And the answer is no, because they're still trying to get back on their feet from getting hurt in World War I. The Bolsheviks were worried about a lot of other things, not necessarily about building up their navy. Okay? Now, the question was this. A lot of the countries agreed in principle that reducing the size of the navy wasn't such a bad idea. Right? The problem is how much does each nation get to build? Okay? And so here's what they came up with at the Washington Naval Conference. They came up with a ratio, okay? And here's the ratio, 5, 5, 3, 1, 1, okay? And so here's how this worked. Great Britain and the United States were the 5s. Japan's the 3, and the 2 1s are Italy and France, okay? And the notion was this. For every 5 tons of battleships or naval ships that America and Great Britain built, Japan would get 3, and France and Italy would get 1. All right? And that way, you don't get these countries trying to spend like crazy. So let's say, for example, America and Great Britain have spent 10 tons, they spend money on 10 tons of new battleship. Okay? Well, if America and Great Britain get 10 each, that means Japan would get 6, and Italy and France would be allowed to build 2. That way you don't get ever out of whack. Like Italy doesn't try to keep up with the United States because they don't have the financial resources to do so. All right? Now, this ratio that they came up with, they negotiated this out, and look, France and Italy understand they don't have the financial resources to keep up with the other countries. But who do you think is really bitter about this ratio? Right? If you answered the Japanese, you're 100% correct. It's another slight where they are really upset. They're like, hey, we didn't want to agree to this. We're not a 3. We should be a 5. It should be 5, 5, 5, 1, 1. Right? But the Japanese, through some harsh negotiations, they settle for the 3. Now, once again, they feel like, in particular, they were like, hey, Western nations have screwed us over and they don't respect us, especially the United States. Okay? Because remember, Japan and the United States are battling for who's going to be the supreme nation in the Pacific region. All right? They have a little bit of a rivalry going on. And you go back and you remember 1850s. President Millard Fillmore sent a really nasty letter to Japan saying, hey, you're going to trade with us or else. All right. Then Japan modernizes. They defeat Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, and they still don't feel like they get the respect. Teddy Roosevelt sails the Great White Fleet around the world, makes sure to flex on Japan while the Navy's out there. And then during World War I, the Japanese felt like they wanted a recognition as a world power and as a statement of racial equality. They don't get it. And now the Washington Naval Conference. Japan feels like the United States and European nations don't respect us, and it's really frustrating. Okay? Now, the Washington Naval Conference, let me go back to this graphic here in a second. Sorry about that. Right? If you look at this graphic again and you see down the line, like for a while, the Washington Naval Conference works, that nations do level off a little bit, and you can see that at the peak in between 1920 and 25, where that dashed vertical line is, where the Washington Naval Treaty is there, if you go over and look at it, most of those countries don't really increase their tonnage all that much. But you're going to find out that Germany and Japan start to not play by the rules. We'll talk about how Germany gets so many naval ships later on, but Japan starts to feel upset, and you look at Japan, that little golden triangle between 1935 and 1940, they definitely increase the size of their navy. All right, so they feel upset. They feel screwed. Okay, but America says, look, we're trying to prevent war. We're trying to get people to disarm voluntarily, and the Washington Naval Conference is a step in the right direction. Okay, now something else that's important comes up in 1924. Okay, 1924. Remember, Germany had to pay back its war debts. Right? And those war debts to Great Britain and France, they were a source of angstiness. And what happened was Germany was starting to struggle to pay back those war debts because remember, they had to pay them in gold. They also had the hyperinflation crisis they had to deal with in the early 20s. They had to put down the coup attempt by the Nazis. And Germany's just a hot mess at this time, and they're struggling to pay back those loans to Great Britain and France. And look, Great Britain and France are starting to get a little upset, and they're like, do we have to invade your country again? Do we have to come in there and take things away? And the Germans start to get a little edgy. And remember, America's all about trying to prevent another conflict, okay? So America has to step in and kind of negotiate between Great Britain, France, and Germany here. And what happens is America has to come up with something called the Dawes Plan. Right? Incidentally, if you're wondering why it's called the Dawes Plan, it's because a guy named Dawes thought it up. All right? And here was the concept. All right? America says, hey, Great Britain and France, you got to cool it a little bit, okay? Because Germany is struggling. All right? And you see on the graphic right here, here's what America did with the Dawes Plan. We agreed to loan money to Germany, okay? And Germany, with those loans, would be able to help repay the war debts to Great Britain and France. Now remember, Great Britain and France they borrowed money from the United States during the war, and so Great Britain and France can now help repay their war debts to the United States. All right? Number one, this helps keep the peace. It prevents another conflict from breaking out. Britain and France, they back off of Germany a little bit as well, okay? And at the same time, America says, look, we're getting repaid our debts from Great Britain and France, and Germany's going to owe us money in the future. All right? So America looked at Germany and said, yeah, you're going to have to pay us back these loans, but you'd rather owe us money than Britain and France. Okay, Britain and France hate your guts and they want to see you permanently weakened. America felt a little bit sorry for Germany and said, look, we don't want another conflict to break out, so we'll loan you money, which you can pay back in the future, and you take those loans and pay back Great Britain and France. All right? Now, we'll stop with this for today. Short little video for today. We'll talk about how immigration is an issue for the United States tomorrow and the eugenics movement.